Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the lovely Jacquelyn Hagen to discuss her books, her writing, chickens. There's a lot going on in today's chat. Thank you so much for joining me, Jacquelyn.
Thank you so much for having me.
And would you like to introduce yourself and your lovely books over here?
Yes, my name is Jacquelyn Hagen. I'm the author of the Riverfall Chronicles, the first book of which is The Wickwire Watch. And the very quick two-sentence pitch for that book is it's about a boy who discovers one day that he's being hunted by dark spirits, and the only people who can keep him safe are a group of fugitives on the run. And it's set in a kind of Victorian Dickensian world, but with magic.
Yeah, you have a blending of different genres in this,
Yes.
and it works really well.
Thank you.
But firstly, before we move on, I do want to say a huge congratulations on becoming a Spiffo finalist. I was excited for you. I'm sure you must have been bouncing.
Yes.
Did you do anything to celebrate?
It was a huge relief. The relief was celebration enough. It was like reward enough. But unfortunately, I'm at the stage in my life where I have I have acid reflux, which prevents me from enjoying alcohol anymore. So I couldn't break out a bottle of whiskey or anything, but I enjoyed a sizable container of ice cream. So that was my celebration.
Approved. As someone who lives off ice cream, that's the best way to celebrate. I'm happy you got to celebrate a bit, and hopefully, I think it's still going, right? So we'll see what's left, but that must have been, I mean, that would have, I imagine that made your week.
Definitely did, yes.
And out of curiosity, how has your experience with Spiffo been going so far?
It's been wonderful and terrifying, and then wonderful and then terrifying. It's just it's this, um, yeah, it's the wonderful part has been the community and meeting so many people, so many reviewers and booktubers and podcast people and readers and fellow authors who I'd never heard of before, much less met. So Spiffo is really my introduction into the publishing world, the indie world, and it's been fantastic. There's been so much support, so much encouragement, and it's almost a shame because because you hate to see the other contestants, get chipped away one at a time. It's really tough, and it's hard to be it's hard to keep an open mind about it as well because everyone says, well, it's very subjective, and it is. It's super
Mhm.
subjective. Everyone's opinion. A lot of these contests depend on maybe one, maybe two people's personal opinion. Um,
Mhm.
so it's hard not to tie yourself to the result or tie your self worth to the result when the stakes seem so high. But I mean, and but it's absolutely true that it is subjective. I got cut from the very first round of BBNYA, the Book Bloggers Novel
Oh,
of the Year.
wow.
So you don't know what the judges are thinking and what they're feeling that day. But it's been great for the most part. And yeah, I'm very thankful. I'm honestly I'm still kind of a little bit in shock. Like I can't believe I'm here doing interviews and my book is on the finalist list. It's just it's wonderful, but yeah.
It's out on people's bookshelves.
Yeah, it's still crazy to me, but it's so gratifying. So yeah.
That's great to hear, and I am sorry to hear about, BBYNA. Did I spell
And
that right?
it's NY, I don't know, yeah.
We
Oh,
all know which one.
yeah.
My spelling skills is not great. You think it would be with reading,
Yeah.
but, no, but I'm happy to hear that, and have you done other competitions, or are there other awards I think I've seen for the Riverfall Chronicles? Or is
Uh,
it
there were like I don't know how many I entered, maybe like 7 or 8, 'cause I
Wow.
read that a good way to market your book is to enter it into contests. That was a great way to get eyes on it. So I did
Yeah.
about 7 or 8 contests. One of them was the Realm Awards, and that was just a couple months ago, and Wickwire Watch won Best Debut Novel at the Realm Awards, so that was awesome. And then there was another, there's another thing called the Indie Brag Medallion, and that's not a contest, but it's something indie authors can apply for, and it's kind of like a seal a seal of approval or a seal of quality. You send your book to
Okay.
this committee, and they rank it and rate it according to several criteria. And if they deem that your book is of high quality according to their standards, you get their little seal. So the Wicklow Watch has that one as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And, Caden here, says, "Congratulations," and Spiffo is my The Bachelor. It's so riveting to watch some of your favorites go up against each other.
Yeah,
Yes, completely
absolutely.
agree. Well, that's awesome, and, you've mentioned I wanna dive back. We'll go back just a little bit. Hello, Tori.
Oh,
And, we'll go back a little bit to, your childhood because you had mentioned in your About You that, you grew up reading and writing. Can you tell us a bit about where your passion for stories began?
so yeah, the earliest memory I have of really getting into stories was my mom taking us. There's myself and three younger sisters. There's four girls and four daughters in my family. So she would regularly take us to the library. I At least once a week, if not more. And that still to this day, libraries and bookstores are just magical places to me, and they have been ever since. And I just couldn't get enough. I read everything that caught my attention. In the early days, I was reading a lot of Boxcar Children, loved Roald Dahl, all those books, James and the Giant Peach, and all that kind of stuff. Was just loved that. Um, all the choose your own adventure books. I think I made it a point to get through every single one of those. Love those. And I was thinking about it today. Being an author is kind of like the ultimate choose your own adventure. So it's kind of awesome.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so it started at the library. Excuse me, I got a cough. Trying to get through it. Yeah, the library. Goodness gracious.
You alright?
Yeah, it's just recovering from a little cold. It doesn't want to go away. Just trying desperately to do everything I could to keep it tamped down, but it's going to come up.
All good. It's part of life.
Woo, that's fun. So, yeah, the library, and then and then it kind of expanded from there. I remember seeing my family was really big into movies, so we that was the thing we did together a lot, was watch a lot of movies. And even from my earliest recollection, I um, I remember watching the old BBC Narnia movies.
Okay.
They came out in like the late 80s, early 90s, and they were on PBS, at least in the US, and those just captivated me. And then my mom told me, "Hey, there's books." And as soon as I heard that, I had to have them all. And I had to have them right away. They're still the copies that I bought with my allowance are still on my shelf, falling apart, but they're my treasures. Um, so that was huge. And I think sometime around that same time in the early 90s, another thing I saw on PBS was a recording of Into the Woods, the
Okay.
stage play by Stephen Sondheim. It's a musical. It was also on PBS. The original cast starring Bernadette Peters. I don't know if you're familiar with Into the Woods.
It sounds familiar.
Basically, retellings of a bunch of like fairy tale characters that interact with each other.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
have this adventure. Just absolutely love that. And as soon as I saw that, I had to start writing my own plays and putting them on in the living room. And so yeah, those were my earliest recollections of getting into story and just loving it in multiple forms and running with it from there.
That's awesome. I love that you kept that Narnia set all these years. So what are you reading, if anything, right now?
I've got 3 books. Yeah, 3 books in rotation right now. I always try to be reading a writing craft book.
Okay,
So, the one I've got right now is, by Stephen King. It's called On Writing. So that's
nice.
one, and then I'm al I'm also trying to get through, I shouldn't say it like that. It just takes me forever because 'cause I'm a slow reader, but I'm reading Lord of the Rings again for the 3rd time.
No, that
Lord of
stands.
the Rings is
It's a
wonderful.
very slow pace.
It's wonderful, but like I said, I'm a super slow reader, so it's taking me, like, a year, if not longer, and Sam and Frodo are just getting to Mordor just now, but, I've been really enjoying that one, and then, I just, started a copy of The Death of Arthur by Thomas Malory. It's like an
Oh,
older classic about King Arthur. So I'm excited to start reading that one as well.
nice. So I just want to go back a second here because you mentioned you've read quite a few writing craft books. If someone came to you and said, "Hey, I want to start writing," which ones would you recommend? Are there any like top one or two that you would say start with these?
Oh, I'm looking at them right now. There's so many. Well, absolutely, the top of the list would probably be Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
Okay,
That's great for not only craft, but for encouragement.
right.
Um,
That's important.
yeah, it's got a lot of humor in it and all this, and that one was huge. And one that's not so fun, but super necessary is, it's called Strunk and White: The Elements of Style, and it teaches you everything you need to know about grammar and punctuation
Mhm.
and passive and versus active and everything. It's got a lot of valuable information in it. But like I said, it's not the most exciting read, but super necessary. So definitely those 2 at least. And the Stephen King one is great. I've read it before, but it's worth
Oh, nice.
owning. Mhm.
So, would any of those be alongside with like storytelling methods, or is it just to that like grammar and structure? And because I feel like grammar and structure are slightly different than a storytelling style, if that makes sense. Or are they one and the same?
Yeah, they the Strunk and White book, it is very heavy on grammar and punctuation and all that, but it does have a lot of good, information about style as well, about, um, j how to process information, how to and other things you're reading, and how to find your own voice and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So, it's got some very valuable things in it.
Awesome. Happy to hear that. So, we're going to go back to your about you because, yes, I go through websites and I read the little about yous from authors for these interviews. But you actually included a quite a diverse set of skills in your about you. And I want to go into them a little bit. So, in addition to writing, you're also a musician. And if we go off on a tangent here, I apologize, but we've got two musicians who might nerd out. So, I would love to know about your musician experience and what instrument you play or multiple instruments you play.
Yes. So, that was another big influence, from my mom. She passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, but she was
Mm.
and
I'm so sorry.
remains my favorite person ever. Not least of all because she was the coolest mom I ever knew. Um, she played drums and electric guitar and acoustic guitar and liked to sing, and she was super into music. Both my parents are very big music fans, so I grew up
Mm.
just inundated with rock and pop from the 60s on through the 80s. Um, Constantly on rotation in the house, and I still love that stuff. The Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and
Yes.
Boston and Journey, all of that stuff. Love it. So yeah, mom playing music in the house was huge. Her whole family's musical, even my aunts and uncles, cousins, everybody's seems to it's just kind of in the in the genes, I guess. I don't know, but so she was huge. And so there were instruments around the house. There's a piano, there's a guitar, and of course, being the curious kid I am and wanting to learn everything about everything, I got her to teach me the basics, and then I did take I think it was a year of piano lessons when I was a kid. Um, that was pretty early on though. Um, and then when I was in high school, I think it was ninth grade, I came home from school one day and there was a list on the counter of all of these music teachers and all the different instruments they taught. And my parents were like, "Pick
Mhm.
one. Which one do you want to take for lessons?" Which
That's
is awesome,
awesome.
right? Yes. It's awesome. That's another long story of, well, so I'll tell you what I ended up picking, but first let me preface it by saying I like to say that my biggest form of rebellion as a teenager was musical, because
Oh.
I there was a point where kind of went off the beaten path of rock and pop in my household, and I started kind of listening to like country
Oh,
and some.
how dare you.
That was my mom's reaction. She was like, "What is this? Who are you? You are not my daughter." Like it was a huge thing. Um, yeah, and so I started listening to some country. This is like in the late '90s, um, but on, I think it was CMT, Country Music Television. I saw a band called Nickel Creek.
Oh.
Have you heard of them?
I don't know, I'd probably recognize their music.
Maybe.
I'm not great with band names, to be honest.
Okay. They they remain my favorite band of all time. They just blew my mind because they weren't really country. It was a mandolin, a violin, and an acoustic guitar and a bass, but it was more kind of folky, progressive bluegrass. It wasn't kind of the old
Okay.
style. And it was this music video of a song called "The Lighthouse Tale."
Mm.
From there, I was deep and into folk and bluegrass, and my mom was like, "What are you doing to me?" But they came around. It was she eventually ended up liking Nickel Creek too. But because of that band, when that list showed up on the counter that day, I saw mandolin on there. I thought, one, I don't
Mm.
know anyone who plays the mandolin, so wouldn't it be cool if I picked that up? Two, this band has a mandolin in it, which I love.
Yeah.
So that kicked off the mandolin, and that led to acoustic guitar, and I play bass as well and some keyboard. I have a viola and a violin, which I do not play
Oh,
terribly well, but I like to just kind of play around on them.
I
Um,
get that.
I'm just kind of a hodgepodge of things: a tin whistle and a harmonica and a
Music
dulcimer.
is like books, you start to collect them the same
Exactly.
way. Instruments just are like, "Oh, I could try that. I might be good at that," and then you're like, no, no,"
Yeah.
but you can stay there for when I'm interested.
Oh, yeah. It's like the same thing when I said libraries and bookstores are magical to me. It's the same when I walk into a music store. It's like, hold me back.
Yes.
It's yeah, so that's how I got into that, and yeah, music has been huge for me in my life, so
That's fantastic, and I mean, with the mandolin, I've seen some people rock out on that. So,
yeah,
definitely, you could, blend that up a little bit with
yeah,
some rock.
very versatile. Yes,
I love it. Okay, so you also, played in folk bands.
I
Can
did.
we get what was that like? Was that part of the rebellion stage? Is that where it started?
Yeah, that was much later on,
Okay.
um, yeah, I let's see, what year was this? This was, like, maybe 8 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I just ran into somebody at work who I heard was played in a band, and I was talking to them about it, and long story short, I ended up joining them, and they're just a group of people who got together at somebody's house once a week and just played. Um, and it was not just bluegrass. We did acoustic covers, we did some classic rock and pop, and it was just anything anyone felt like playing.
Right.
And it was awesome. It got to the point where we were a pretty tight group of 6 of us, I believe. And we got together religiously and played every week. And sometimes we'd get asked to go play at a restaurant or
Mm.
somebody's party or something. So that was a lot of fun. We weren't super professional by any means. We weren't trying to like cut an album or make it big or anything.
Just kind of on the side, having
Yeah,
fun with it and,
yeah,
getting together. Jamming sessions are so much fun.
they are. And a couple of people from this band were also in an Irish band
Okay.
that got together and played. And so I went over there I don't know, half a dozen times and played with the Irish band, Irish music on the mandolin. That was just a blast. Um,
So, did you find that different to play than what you would normally play, the Irish music? Or is it pretty similar?
it was different. They were focused more on there was a lot more traditional tunes,
Okay.
but as long as you kind of knew the pattern, and the chord changes were pretty simple. Um,
Right.
and I don't recall anyone singing, it was mostly instrumental, and my
Okay.
other folk band did a lot of I think everything we did was singing. But yeah, playing music is so much fun, and I can't wait.
Mhm.
I just moved to a new place, so one of the things I'm hoping to find a new group of people to play music with because I really miss it. But
Oh, that would be awesome.
and I
Yeah,
will
hope
tell you sorry, I didn't
yeah.
mean to cut you.
No, go for it.
I will tell you, little side note, we so like I said, we mostly played covers in that folk band, but occasionally one of us would bring, "Hey, I wrote this song. Let's put some
Ooh.
music to it and play it." And I did that with "Weather the Wind."
Oh, okay.
In the Wickwire Watch. That's a song that's mentioned in the Wickwire Watch, kind of towards the end. Um,
Mm.
so that was that was a regular,
Do you remember the page?
let's see, it was in shoot.
It's okay if you don't.
It's when they're let's see. A girl can't be too careful. It's kind of near the end when they go
Oh,
to
I
murder.
see it.
Yeah.
It has its own section at the end.
And then I did put the full lyrics at the very end. Yep.
Yeah. I'm gonna try and put that up, see if people I don't know if people can see that, but that is fantastic.
So once I had all the lyrics written, I thought, well, I got all these instruments lying around. I have this song I wrote for this book. Let's just figure out some chords to go with it. And then once I had a band, it was like, okay, great. Now I got somebody to sing it for me and we can all play along with it. So that was
That's fantastic.
a lot of fun.
Is it available anywhere online where we could listen?
Um, I do have a recording. I have not put it anywhere yet. I've been thinking about it more and more lately that I should.
I
But
mean, pop that on your website, put it on Spotify. You would have people listening.
it's a good idea.
So with all the instruments you have accumulated, is there any other kind of instrument that you would love to learn or one that you already have and you'd like to hone a bit better?
Definitely the violin and viola are 2 things I really wanna focus on when I have a little more time. Um, another th I would also love to have an electric guitar. I don't have one of those, but that would be a lot of fun. And then a cello, but those are giant.
Yes.
Yeah, those are a big commitment in multiple ways, but it would still be cool to know. Do you play anything other than violin?
So I play violin and ukulele. I've been dabbling with mandolin because the fingerboard is basically the same as the
Mm,
mandolin. So while I do strum away on it, this hand, the hand that normally would be bowing on the violin, does not cooperate well with strumming. That has been a huge learning curve for me. But yeah, I've kind of stuck to string instruments.
mm.
I Growing up, I played saxophone, flute, I did acoustic guitar as well, and electric. The problem I had with guitar was the instrument is physically too big for me. So I would end up with a lot of shoulder pain and things
Oh,
like that.
well,
So
then mandolin's perfect for you.
exactly. Same with the ukulele. It's like
Mhm.
tiny, I'm tiny, you know.
Do you have you ever done electric violin?
I do actually have an electric violin. Yeah, I mainly use the electric violin to practice when my little one is napping.
Oh,
Because violin if is extremely loud. There would be no practicing otherwise, so but it is neat to plug it in because it sounds like a guitar,
yes.
and there's so many cool things you could do with it. That's a whole other learning curve,
Mm.
but, we have Daniel, leak the tapes, I agree.
I should. I really should. Yeah.
So, let's, dive into the other section here because you are also a baker of one of my favorite things, bread. And as one baker to another, do you have a go-to bread recipe or any kind of recipe that you love?
For bread, I'd say the one I make the most often is, it's actually a Julia Child recipe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you look it up on Google, I think you just type Julia Child white sandwich bread. It sounds like the most boring thing in the world, but it's really good bread, and I've made it countless times. I usually don't go full 100% with the white flour. I usually throw in a cup or two of wheat flour, but yeah, I make that one a lot. And then you slice it up and put it in plastic bag and put it in the freezer, and it keeps forever.
Yep.
So that's a go-to. But I love baking, but it's definitely been a an adventure. It's something you have to learn. There's a lot of kind of tips and tricks to learn.
Yes,
But I
especially for your own altitude because the
yeah.
humidity has an impact on the dough.
Yeah, and
Mm.
I loved that video you just put out about the cinnamon buns. Oh my gosh,
Thank you.
as soon as I saw that, I had to find a recipe for cinnamon buns and, like, oh man, those look so
It
good.
they're so good. The thing I love about that dough is it's so soft and it has a bit of a chew to it.
Mm,
So when you bite into it and you pull, it has a combination of like, yeah, you kinda have to chew into it, but it also melts in your mouth,
yeah.
right? It's a beautiful combo for a dough. Um, Speaking of bread recipes, one of my go-tos is, the Hokkaido milk bread from
Ooh,
Japan. It's, super soft, like, you can squish that guy down, it pops right back up.
ooh,
Delicious.
nice. I'll have to check that out.
So now that we've made everyone hungry, you've also raised chickens. The list goes on, folks. How did chickens come about? How did you start keeping chickens?
I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. How did I start keeping
Not
chickens?
true.
Um, I so the 3 big things in my life are stories, music, and animals. You can boil me down to those 3 points. I love animals. The the same way bookstores and music stores are magical, like farms are magical places to me. My grandparents had a farm in Louisiana. We often went to visit them um, as I was a kid growing up, and I always thought it was just a magical place. People maybe who are used to farms or growing up around animals might think that's silly, but I grew up in the suburbs, so anything out of the suburbs was magical to me. But just to wake up and look out the window and see a herd of cows, it was just I love that. I still love that. One of my dreams is to one day have a hobby farm.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, with like dwarf goats and donkeys and just all of the animals. Uh, so being in the military, that's difficult to
Mhm.
because you move around a lot, and moving animals is a whole thing. But
Yes.
I was stationed in Georgia for a long time, and I knew I would be there for a long time. So I took advantage of it, and I thought, well, this is a perfect time to fulfill a little piece of that fantasy. So I had a nice house on a nice. It was just an acre of land, but it was enough to get a chicken house built, and I only had 6 chickens. I didn't need very many, but it was so worth it. I had so much fun raising those chickens and taking care of them. And if you've never had like pure fresh eggs, it's not even close
They're
to store bought.
they're delicious. If
Yeah.
you can find a local farm who just sells it at the end of their laneway, it's so worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to have chickens again. I did have to move eventually. And I'm at a point in my career now where it's going to be kind of shorter tours, like 3 years, maybe 4. So that makes it a little more difficult. I don't want to be moving chickens around, the country with me. That's hard on them too. So, but I am hoping in the future to do it again because I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's great. I imagine there's quite a few, learning curves with taking care of chickens 'cause I find avian species can be quite delicate in terms
Yes,
of their health. So,
absolutely.
kudos to you because that's like you're not only keeping these living beings alive, but you're their 100% doctor all
Yeah,
the time.
yep. I had to nurse a chicken a couple times in my garage, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, animals are worth it for sure. Just like music.
Yes. So we'll do a quick check-in with the live chat. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Jacquelyn, please pop them in the chat, and we will cover those before moving into the writing and the books that we've got here for the Riverfall Chronicles. And Caden, he says, "I love making milk bread. What is your next book-based recipe, Kay?"
I'd like to know.
It will likely be one of the Meredith books, so either Patricia Meredith's, Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries or Andrew D. Meredith's, book up here from the Collation cycle. So one of those. I know for sure there's gonna be a recipe in there I'd like to do. For myself with the baking, I prefer savory things to sweet, but, you know I'm gonna bake anything because it's an excuse to do it. So, while the chat is going with their questions, we'll check back in, but let's dive into your writing because I have way too many questions for the time that we have available. And at what point did you know that this story about this young boy was the one that you wanted to tell?
Wanted is a strong word.
Told to tell, if that's the case.
Well, he almost left me with no choice. So it was this one morning back in 2009 where I had this very sudden, out of nowhere, strong image of this boy wearing a top hat and an oversized coat, and kind of that there wasn't much to it, but it was so intriguing. Um, and I had to know more. And then that was followed by a couple more. I had a couple of very vivid dreams with very strong images in them that I'd never really had before. That nothing had really stuck with me like the way those did, and I couldn't get them out of my head. And I was like, "Is there a connection?
Mm,
Um, what's the backstory? Like, why are they appearing to me now?" It almost felt like they came to find me in a way, and I still kind of think of it that way. But well, the boy showing up in a top hat kind of narrowed the narrowed the focus for me as far as time and setting. But I I love Charles Dickens. I love that time period. I love Gothic
mm.
literature. Um, I love really anything historical. I really gravitate towards stories like that. But these images, once started kind of linking them together, I couldn't stop. I was supposed to be focusing on my military studies at the time, and I kept telling myself, "I don't have time to write a story. I don't have time to write a book. What is this? No, no, no. This is just for fun on the side. This is nothing." And 13 years later, 14 years later,
3 books later and
maybe
more planned.
on the way. Yeah, it just he those characters took hold. They really took hold and wouldn't let go. Um and I after a while, I felt like I almost had an obligation or a duty to share their story.
Mm.
Like I owed it to them. Um, so yeah, that's how that happened.
I love it. They pressured you until you caved.
It sure did.
That goes with their personality.
Yes, yes.
So we have a question here from Laurel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I am terrible with names. I apologize if it's wrong. They're saying, has the story changed a lot since the first draft, or has it stayed pretty close to the final result?
So this is my friend L'Oreal, and
L'Oreal, okay.
he knew me back in 2009 when I was first writing this story.
So she's got the inside
He
scoop.
does. Has it changed a lot since the first draft? Some things have changed a lot. I've mentioned before the character of Mr. Spindler was not always there.
Mm,
In very, very early drafts, he was at first there was a kind of a bumbling inspector that showed up at Bash's house and was like investigating the house and Bash himself, how he found him. And it was kind of a little more wacky in a way. And I had a couple of friends read it, and one of them was like, is this the tone you really want?" And I realized, yeah, it's probably not the direction I really want to start off with, at least. So he became Mr.
mm.
Spindler, genre, so that character did get changed.
Okay.
But as far as the overall story, that's pretty much been the same.
Okay. Nice. And actually, we have Jeffrey here who says, just picked up book one. Enjoy, Jeffrey.
Thank you, yeah.
So, from the stories and the characters, popping in, what, at the end of the day, what did you want readers to walk away with after reading your stories?
Well, of course, I would hope readers are entertained, um,
Mm.
and moved. Uh,
Accomplished.
yeah.
At least with me.
I'm
Accomplished.
glad. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I hope I hope the books make people kind of reflect on how they view the world and how they view other people.
Mm,
So many of us take things and other people at face value, or we go off of information we hear from other people, it's kind of through hearsay
mm,
or third party. Um, and people and things are not always as they seem, but I feel like people tend to forget that. And that's something I've tried to kind of highlight, I guess, in the books is you don't know everything that's going on in a person's life. You can think
mhm.
you do, or a group of people. You can think you do, but you don't really until you dive deep and dig deep. So I hope it makes people think about, yeah, their relationship to each other, to the world. Yeah,
Beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot more than just a first impression or hearsay.
yeah.
And Stephanie here has a question as well. How have you changed as a result of writing these books?
That is an excellent question, Stephanie. How have I changed? Wow. As a result of writing these books, these characters have taught me lessons. There have been things that have come out of their mouths or things they've done that I've actually ended up really needing to hear later in my life. It was almost like prophetic in a way, and I had no idea when I was writing it. That's happened many times. So they've the stories themselves have been a source of encouragement for me. And yeah, how have I changed? Yeah, I'd like to think I'm also more reflective and contemplative and not so quick to judge. That's been
Mm,
a huge thing too. I think a lot of people are, especially in their teens or the early 20s, they think they know everything. I was definitely one of those people, but it doesn't take too much experience in the world before you realize you are terribly wrong. And yeah, but these books have helped me a lot in many ways.
that's beautiful. And you managed, we talked about this before, but you also managed to blend in a bunch of different genres or themes and genres within this series without it feeling out of place. So there's Gaslamp, fantasy, there's a bit of what is it? There's like some horror, darker elements in there. Was that by design or did that just develop as you wrote?
It was definitely not like an intentional choice. I wasn't like, I'm gonna write this book with all these cool things in it. It wasn't like that.
Mm,
Um, it was more like I had all these experiences and all these influences that were all just kind of jumbled in me all together. And I don't know, it still feels to me like the most natural thing in the world that what I would create would be, um, yeah, I guess not just one narrow focus. It would be a mixture of things because people are a mixture of things. I don't know. I've got lots of different tastes and likes and preferences, um, and a lot of the stories I prefer myself are a blend of genres. I find that's
mm.
what I gravitate towards. It's what keeps me interested. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, it's just I think it's a lot of fun. So as long as you can do it well and it doesn't seem out of place,
Mm.
Yeah, it was kind of always gonna be that way, and fantasy is a perfect playground for that kinda thing too, so that worked out.
Yes, it definitely is. You've got your fantasy and sci-fi mixes, all kinds of stuff. You've got, I think, Cal Black is like Western and fantasy even, so lots of options you can go with. And so I'm curious about how you navigated your writing because I imagine you started writing or you were learning about writing as you went. Uh, but did you have a system while you were writing? Did you outline? Did you play around a little bit, discovery write? What did you end up doing?
For the very first book, for the Wickwire Watch, I think the majority of it was probably discovery writing. I don't remember
Mm.
taking a ton of notes. I just had a lot of strong images, like I said, and it was kind of a matter of stringing them together and getting from one point to another, but letting the characters kind of guide me and lead me in that effort. Um, but at this point, there's so much to keep track of now that it's turned into a series. At first, it was just going to be
Yes.
one book, just one. And then when I started getting into it, I was like, okay, maybe three books, and that's it. And once it quickly became apparent, no, the story that they need to tell is it's going to be longer, and so I had to quickly organize myself. At this point, I do have a lot of notes. At one point, I had like a Microsoft Word file for like every aspect of the series, like one for
Mm.
here's characters and here's places and here's magic system and here's this and that, and it was too much. So I found a tool I started using, a website called Campfire. Have
Okay, I've heard of that one.
you heard of? Yeah, it's
Mm.
basically you can create a kind of like a wiki for your world. So that's been a big help to me
That's
using.
fantastic.
Yeah, but since the first book, I've definitely been much more of a plotter, maybe like 75% plotting, and then 25% of it is still discovery writing.
Okay, interesting. I
Yeah.
like how it transitioned through it
Yeah.
because you're right. There's like even as a reader, when I'm reading a series and I go from book one to book two, I guarantee you I'm tracking those little plot lines because I'm like, how is this all tied together? Does this make sense if they do that? Like you start to theorize
Mhm.
because authors, I find you give us hints. You do drop that foreshadowing even if we don't see it.
Yes.
So, trying to think about what's to come or the answers to all the questions that you build is
Yeah.
definitely, a lot of fun. Torturous sometimes, but fun.
Just this week, I've started on the next draft of book 4, and more than any other time before, I have a file called "Things to Remember," and that just keeps growing with every book, like, all these things I have to remember
Oh,
about what people did and what they said and how they look, and yeah, but it's good.
yes. Well, thank you for organizing all that and continuing to write. So, with tracking it all, have you found your groove, or is it still a little tricky for you?
I think I would say I found my groove. Yeah.
Nice. Makes it a little easier.
Yeah, it does. I'm a super type A person anyway. I like to have things organized and in their place, and so it's great. It's great for that to fulfill that need. But yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so, with how smooth your storytelling feels with your books, I'm curious how you found your voice with your storytelling. Was it tricky? Did it take a couple of, are there unpublishable drafts of the Wickwire Watch that we'll never see? Or was it pretty quick to find?
No, of course. So this from from the moment I began formulating the idea for the first book to publication was 13 years. 13 years. Um, and in all that time, it went through multiple drafts, many, many drafts. Yeah, the very first few drafts. Of course, if anything, anyone writes, the very first few drafts are not gonna be they're just you're just making clay. I like to call it making clay. You just got some
Mm.
dirt, some water, and you're just throwing it together, and you can't shape it. You can't shape anything into anything until have water and clay. You don't have it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to have something to work with. So that's what those first few drafts are for. But it took years um, of practice. I
Mm.
think that's vital for an author finding their voice is practice. So many people want to rush ahead and start publishing now and start seeing success now. And of course, I was one of them too. I mean, that's understandable. You get excited and you get anxious. You want to share this with people. But if I would have published when I was in my 20s, ooh, I would have regretted it. Looking back, especially now, I'm glad I
Right.
had that time, not only to practice, but to, like I said, read through craft books and learn. And also, I think it also takes time. It's it's almost the same in just your anyone's life, how they find their own voice about anything. How do you find yourself, your own personal opinions, what you believe in?
Mm.
It takes time, right? I mean, to get away from
Yeah.
what you've grown up with or what's right around you. It takes time, it takes experience, it takes education, either
Mm.
formal or informal. And it's the same with writing. A lot of authors, myself included, you a lot of people start out with fan fiction or copying very closely their favorite author or their favorite book for whatever reason. And that's perfectly fine, part of the process. It's natural, it's good.
Mhm.
Something, get it, kick off, get the engine started doing something. But if you stay there, then that's not your voice.
Mm.
It's somebody else's. And whatever stories you have to tell, only you can tell. Those characters
Right.
came and found you for a reason, not anyone else. So yeah, I think finding your voice is just a lot of time and practice.
Makes sense, and honing your skill of getting that story out. We also have a message here from TGI. I'm behind on the stream, but I love Nickel Creek. I bought a cheap mandolin because of them. Unfortunately, I never took any lessons, and my inherent musical talent is limited, so I was never any good. YouTube.
YouTube,
YouTube has amazing
yes.
music lessons and tutorials. By all means, dive when you get to this part of the stream, just start Googling mandolin lessons.
Oh man, it's music is so good for everyone in any situation. And if you have kids, like I'm
Mhm.
not gonna say force them to take piano lessons, but like it's a maybe bring them a list and say, here, pick one of these instruments and take some lessons. Oh, it's been huge for me in so many aspects of my life. I even feel like music has affected me as a writer. I mean, a lot
Mhm.
of times I feel like the act of writing is a lot like composing or conducting. There's a
Yep,
You have to get a sense of feeling for beats and timing,
an emotion.
emotion, like the right time to yeah, there's so much of that goes into play with that. It's so valuable.
And too with the kid thing, with musical instruments, I mean, kids might not play the instruments, they might not play them well, or they might pick them up every now and again, but just having them there is enough for I've found to for these kids to develop an appreciation for it. Even if they don't end up playing an instrument, the appreciation for music is a huge, influence that you can give to anyone, really. And Amy here has a question as well. Would you consider making a TV series if someone approached you to make one? I hope the answer is yes.
Of course, I would consider it, but I would have at least one very stern, what's the word?
Caveat?
Yeah, caveat, I guess, condition. I think one of the when you're especially when you're doing an adaptation, maybe the very most important, tied with most important, aspect is casting.
Mm, that's
And
important. It's
very,
very
very
important.
and who better to say, "These are my people," than the author? I mean, people can't get upset if the author's like, "I stand by this list of people." And anyway, yeah, the cast. So I would definitely want a final say over casting, and of course be involved at some level with the actual script writing. But of course, that's the dream. I think that's every author's dream. Absolutely.
I love it. I love when things get adapted to shows or movies, even though there is that slight fear that they're going to derail from the original material, but sometimes they hit the nail on the head,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes no, it might not be to the book and how the original script is, but the turn that they took with it can be really creative and well done. I personally found that with Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials.
Okay.
I've only watched season 1 so far, but I loved the tone that they took with it.
I
I
read I
loved it.
haven't seen the show. I haven't seen the show yet, but I love the books.
It's beautifully done. The animals that they did with the CGI, just beautiful, and the way they took the tone of it.
Mhm.
Li
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that's just important. Even if you don't keep to the material, make it good.
Yeah.
Make it irresistible for
Yeah.
fans. So, with that, let's dive into picking a favorite child, as one does.
How dare
Hard questions here. And so, do you have a favorite character to write or one that was harder to figure out?
I won't say they're my favorite overall because, like, I cannot pick a favorite. They're all very dear. But as far as favorite to write, that's a little more specific. It's definitely Caradoc because he is unpredictable. A lot of
Yeah.
characters in the series are unpredictable, but he is particularly fun because he's got a lot of things going on.
A lot of mystery to him too.
A lot of mystery, but also he knows not to take himself too seriously all the time, and I feel like that's a big stumbling block with a lot of fantasy, as a lot of
Mm.
the main characters or protagonists take themselves too seriously.
Their
Um,
egos up here a little bit.
yeah, and even though he's an intriguing character, but he has a sense of humor, and I it's kind of similar to my own in a way, and that it gets a little bit on the darker side, but it makes me laugh. So he's a lot of fun to write. The tricky one to write is Mavie. She's the character from book 2, The Spider Key.
Hmm.
And she's tricky because without revealing a spoiler, she's under a very specific curse,
Mm.
but I sometimes forget that. I sometimes forget that she's not actually what she appears to be,
Mm.
and
So
that
the visual gets to you a little
the
bit.
visual kinda gets me, and I think, "Oh, she's this wise old woman," and I have to many times I find myself going, that is not entirely her situation," and I have to, like, readjust, so that's been a little tricky, but I
Oh.
still love her as a character.
Yes,
And
yeah, she
I have to ask you
yes.
about who your favorite characters are.
Oh, you can't make me choose. This is
Yeah,
my show.
oh, top 3.
No, definitely. I it's hard because Caradoc was quite interesting because he has that air of mystery to him. He's he's not always gentle in his
Right,
methods. So, while he cares, he's gonna give you tough love,
yes.
and that definitely makes for some intriguing moments. But I definitely think and I'm terrible with names even though I love characters, Ink. Ink caught my attention immediately. He's absolutely charming, he's a rascal, but in the most interesting way you can make, a young person, for an adult reader. He's a pickpocket, he lives by his own rules, he's witty, and he kinda does what he wants, and you wrote him in a way that's absolutely charming. So, quickly, he became my favorite, but if I had to pick a second, it would be, the sisters, Jo and Ro, was it?
Gwendolyn.
Wendelin. Jo and Wendelin.
Mm,
For obvious reasons, they're musically inclined, and
yeah,
I love their passion for music.
awesome.
So, did you originally plan to self-publish, or did you have other goals? Did you dive deep into the process before you started publishing? What was that like when you had your book and you're like, "What do I do next?"
Yeah, what do I do next? I asked that question a lot, and for a long time, the answer was, "I'm just doing this for myself, it's just for fun, it's a hobby, it's a side, interest." and I'll just share it with friends and family who are interested. Um, I kind of have always had an aversion to this is a weird thing to say for someone who just entered a really big contest, but I've had an aversion to, well, highly competitive fields. And I knew that publishing was a highly competitive field, like very,
Mm.
especially if you're an unknown trying to get, a literary agent or a publishing deal is very, very, very slim chance. And so that
Yeah.
wasn't very attractive to me. And I never felt like I needed um, that was something I absolutely needed. Of course, it would have been nice. But it took maybe 6 or 7 years into the process, I did start sending queries out to literary agents, just, "Here's
Okay.
the first 5 pages. Are you interested?" And I did get a couple bites that way, like, maybe 3 of them contacted me, and they were like, "Yeah, send me the full manuscript," or, "This looks interesting." But nothing ever really came of that. And if anyone who's done the querying process knows it's kind of it's draining and, like,
Yeah.
disheartening. So after a while, I was like, "Nah, I don't know if this is really worth it." I know some authors continue doing it for years and they send out hundreds, but I didn't really feel that strong need to keep pushing in that direction, pushing against that brick wall. Um, so I was like, I'm just gonna write these for me. And and then before I know it, I've got 3 books done. And I had a friend just a couple of years ago say, "You need to look into self-publishing." And I thought, "No, that's more competition and pressure." And I plus, so I had a bias at the time. I thought self-publishing isn't really like they're not really legit authors. It's a terrible thing to say, but that is how I did think going through.
That's the stereotype,
It is the
by all
stereotype.
means.
But my friend was like, "No, no, look into this. It's the whole thing now. It's changed." So I did. I started reading a lot of articles and listening to podcasts and other authors, and he was absolutely right. I was shocked that it had become an industry where,
Mm.
as long as you um, worked, educated yourself and invested in it and did the best you could absolutely come up with a product that was every bit as good as a traditionally published novel. And I thought, well, at this point, these characters have been with me for 13 years, and a couple of other things that happened in my life where I that caused me to think this is not scary anymore compared to some other things that have
Mm.
happened to me. This is no longer like a scary prospect, and life is short. Let's go for it. So I made a commitment to really spend a good chunk of time learning about the process, learning the best way to go about it. I took a couple of courses,
Oh,
which was
wow.
super helpful. And then, yeah, I am so happy to be an indie author.
Mm.
So happy. It's been wonderful, and
It
I wouldn't change it.
That's awesome, and so I'm curious, you said you took some courses. Are those readily available still? Are they, something that others might be able to take if they're interested?
Yeah, so there is one by an author. She's an indie author. Her name is Sarah Cannon. You can Google her name, Sarah Cannon. She's an
Yeah.
urban fantasy author. Are you familiar with her?
I believe
Are
Andrew
you?
D. Meredith has talked about her before.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So she has I haven't read any of her books, but she has a lot of YouTube videos, and
Mhm.
her course is called Heart Breathings.
Okay.
And she does it once or twice a year, and it does cost money, but she takes you
Mm.
from A to Z, like anything you ever want to know about anything to do with indie publishing. If you have no idea where to start, which was my situation when a year or two ago, it's an ex that was a whole education. And then there's an author named David Gaughran,
Okay.
Gaughran. He offers a lot of free courses about marketing, and that's also been super helpful for me.
That's excellent. Yeah, because that's the big one, right?
Yeah,
That tends to catch people is there's a whole marketing section to the publishing
yeah,
industry that normally would be taking care of someone else if you were a traditionally published author, but every you play every role when you're
yes,
publishing. You're the author, you are the publisher, the marketer, you are doing the back and forth with the cover designs, everything.
mhm.
You've got your hand on everything, and it's a lot.
It is
It's a
a lot.
lot of work. And with that being said, you also have audiobooks for your books. And those are done by Wayne Farrell, which are fantastic. And I did not realize, for anyone who is watching, Wayne Farrell also did Wistful Ascending by JCM Byrne. And I did not realize that those two voices were the same people because they are so different. Just an FYI, because that was news to me. Shouldn't have been news to me, but it was. Can you talk about the process of working with Wayne, getting the audiobooks done?
Yeah, so for audiobooks, there's really two main routes you can take as an indie author. Maybe three. There's three. One of which is to kind of either do it yourself or find somebody you know who could do it. Um, but the other two ways are through ACX, which is Amazon's company that is behind Audible, or this other company called Findaway Voices, which allows you to distribute your audiobooks on a little bit of a wider scale. So I decided to go with Findaway, and they were super helpful in the process. They did all the contracts. They arranged for the auditions. They did all the paperwork. So yeah, Findaway Voices was very helpful to me. And so yeah, they wanted, I don't know, like a couple pages from the text, and then they sent it to a bunch of actors that I had chosen. You get to narrow it down what kind of voice you're looking for, or what kind of accents you want them to do. And so I think
Nice.
I got about 10 auditions back, and I got to listen to them all.
Wow.
But as soon as I heard Wayne's voice, it was over.
Understandable. He does a fantastic performance.
Isn't it? Oh man. And he continues to blow me away. He's so talented, and he can do so many voices. It's amazing. So many accents. So once I got hooked up with Wayne and we did the first book, I was like, well, now we're connected for the rest of the series, if not,
Mm.
for life, for the rest of my publishing career, because he's fantastic. He's so professional and so kind, and encouraging. Um, yeah, so that's been wonderful. At this point now, yeah, I just shoot him an email when I'm like, "Hey, a new book's coming out," and he's like, "All right, when can I get it?" and yeah, he's just about to start recording the audiobook for book 3, The Blue Flames. So that should be out sometime, yeah, near the end of November, early December. But he's been fantastic. Audiobooks are a investment, I will say. They are a costly investment, maybe more so than any other stage of the process. But if you can invest or save up or find a way to do it, I found it to be absolutely indispensable. Um, there's a lot of audiobook fans out there.
Yes, I know for myself as a reader, I do a lot of immersion reading. So I'll often have a physical, an ebook, and then the audiobook. So I'll listen along as I'm reading either of the hardcover or the hard copies of it. And for me, that I want to get lost in a book. If you can do character voices, that just adds to it for me. But it also allows me to, when I want to keep reading, I can put the physical one down and go do chores and still be somewhat productive and, do my adult responsibilities and still listen to the book and the story. So I think for me as a reader, that's indispensable to have. So I definitely appreciate that investment. And I'm curious now, what's next? You've got the audiobook coming out for book 3, The Blue Flames. Is there a projected, amount of books in the series, if at all? And what's next in your writing?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's kind of just been slowly growing the length of the series, and I'm someone who I'm very careful about not overstaying my welcome.
Mm.
I There's so many series and TV shows and things that do that, and it gets very apparent when that's starting to happen. And I am it's a big, I don't know, I wouldn't say warning sign, but I'm very conscious of it. So, but like I said, I have these very firm points I want to hit. There's still some very strong story plot lines I haven't explored yet that would love to and need to, and it's part of their story.
Mm.
And I was it 2022 is when I finished writing book 4. Well, I thought I had finished it. I was writing book 4, and then according to my notes, I was only halfway done, and
No.
I looked down at my page count, and it was like 600, 600 something, and my notes
Ah.
said, "You're only 50% done," and I called my sister, I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, what am I gonna do? I don't want this series to get even bigger." And she's like, "Sounds like you gotta chop that book in half," and I was like, "No, no," because, like I said, I'm wary of overstaying my welcome, but you have, you have to be faithful to the characters. That's an author's first um, requirement. You have to be faithful to the characters for the
Mm.
story they need to tell.
Yes.
Your second duty is to yourself and making sure you're telling the story as well as you can. And then your third duty is to your audience. So if if you lose a couple people along the way, it is what it is. But yeah, so at this point, at this point, it's looking like 7 books.
Okay.
I might be able to maybe 6, but somewhere around 6, 7. But it is not superfluous. It is not.
Mm. It's ever changing.
It's ever changing, but there is a point and a purpose and intent behind it. It's
Mm.
nothing will be wasted. Not a page will be wasted. I promise. Even yes.
Yeah.
So I'll say that.
Okay, because yeah, you've woven together quite a few plot lines
Yeah,
that would need wrapping up. So when
exactly.
you you can't miss those. As much as it's character driven, you can't have those missing plots. They're just like, oh, that fell off the cliff. We don't know what happened to it.
Right, you have to take care of everybody, and when you get to the end of book 3, you will you will see that the story cannot end there. Cannot.
I mean, that's been the first 2 books, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
I'm ready.
Yes.
And, we have a question here from L'Oreal again. So, when the book series is done, would you consider a spin-off series expand the world, whether it focuses on the characters we know or new ones entirely? Please say yes again.
Well, I will say, first of all, that the thought of ending the series now, even though I've just said, like, I'm terrified of overstaying my welcome, I'm also terrified of ending it because, one, I don't wanna part ways with these characters that I've been, hanging out with for a very long time now, but also because yeah, it's like, what do you how do you follow it up? Right?
I'm right there with you.
So I do have some ideas about spinoffs with a character, at least one in particular that could go for a new series for sure. And if enough people tell me what they want, that's helpful in
Chat,
guiding me.
chat, comments. If you're watching this and it's not live, comment.
Can't make any promises, but it helps to know what people are wanting and loving and who.
Okay, I'm gonna send you my list.
Do it.
And Jeffrey has the, right idea here, write a 1,200-page book for book 4.
Ooh.
That's
Well,
the
see,
only solution.
no, because Amazon has a limit on how big they will print for the
Oh,
paperbacks. You can't go over, I think it depends on your trim size, but for the one I
right.
picked for the series, I think it's 8 or 900 pages. They will not print a book larger than that. So that's another
Oh.
good reason to I have to kind of keep an eye on that.
Oh, dang, Amazon.
Yeah.
There we go. Jeffrey, you've got homework.
Yes, everyone has homework.
And, so you're working on book 4 next, and then you're just continuing with the series and possibly spinoffs.
Yes. Yeah. Writing is my most favorite thing in the world to do. It's so fulfilling, and it feels after a long lifetime of trying this career and trying that job, it feels so like where I'm supposed to be. So I can't imagine stopping, ever.
That's fantastic. So, just out of curiosity then, are there any other stories, maybe outside of this one, that you would like to tell or explore later down the road?
Yes. And I hesitate to say this to you because I think I've heard you mention you're not a fan of this genre. I think it was you.
Well, we'll see. It depends on the genre.
So, how do you feel about fantasy westerns?
I'm dipping my toes in. The
Okay.
reason why it's westerns in particular that I'm iffy on is I was one of the, grandchildren who would get stuck at grandma and grandpa's house and watch the same Clint Eastwood movies and cowboy movies over and over. I could repeat the lines back to you. So that's I've had my fill of
Yeah.
westerns, but I
Okay.
think with fantasy, I've never done it. I've
Okay.
never done Western fantasy mix before, so I'm absolutely willing to dip my toes in.
That is something I definitely have my eye on. I love westerns. Yeah, I haven't been beat over the head with them like you have, so I can understand your aversion, but that's one thing I am eyeing for the future.
That's fair. There's only in my opinion, there's only so much of East Clintonwood that you can watch. There's only so much.
Yeah.
Oh, and okay. So there's hope for more writing and more
Oh,
stories
yeah,
from you.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I think as a reader and anyone in the chat, if you are like this as well, so long as the story and the characters are compelling, they draw you in, setting isn't that big of a deal, right? If you're writing a story that feels flat, the characters, they're not they don't feel like they could be real, for me at least. That's where things start to get tricky, or you're following those cliched tropes and it's very predictable.
Mhm.
That's where things can be a little different. Clint Eastwood, yes. Yeah, they're all the same. I come at me.
Fair.
Like,
Yeah, that's
I'm sorry, right? But no, it's I think it's a huge difference. It makes a huge difference as a reader. The setting no longer matters. The genres no longer matter. I'm also not a huge romance reader, but I will absolutely read romance that is done really, really well and doesn't fall into those like harlequin trope vibes, right?
fair.
That's not my taste, but I will still read romance if it's done in a way that feels like that could be a genuine romance, not just, oh, and swooning and under the starlight and everything like that.
Yeah.
So we'll do a final check in for anyone in the live chat who has questions. Feel free to pop those in. And while we wait for those questions to come through, because there is that delay, if you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring author, what would you tell them?
Um, I would say it's kind of a threefold piece of advice. Learn as much as you can. Take in as much as you can from other authors, from just the books you love, craft books like we talked about, um, courses. Learn all you can, learn as much as you can so that you have a good solid foundation to build on and to stand on. But also trust your own instincts. I know a lot of authors worry about, am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? What if people don't like this? There's so many things in my books I thought, oh my gosh, people are gonna like send me hate mail for it. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. But you like I said before, you have a duty first to your characters and to the story and to telling it the best way you can, and then to yourself, and then to your readers. So yes, education, learn as much as you can, take in comments, be develop a hard enough shell for, reading criticism or reviews that might not be great. There is value in everything. Don't take it personally, but don't blow it off either, because if enough people say the same thing about this issue, that's something to look at. So take in all the information you can, but trust your own instincts. Yeah, that would be my advice.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's not a straightforward thing.
Right.
I imagine. It does not sound like a straightforward thing. It sounds like trial and error. It
Mhm.
sounds like a lot of discovery and work.
Yes.
It's a marathon. It's
And
it's
you
not
need people who will tell you the truth. Find
mm,
people who will tell you the truth, because there are a lot of people who say, "This thing is absolutely great, it's brilliant," and they have good intentions, but saying that about everything, do you know what I
one
mean?
constructive criticism as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've definitely gone down that as a reader when so I've dabbled in, beta reading
Mm.
over the summer, and it's a completely different mindset. Absolutely. As a reader, when I'm reading a book and I'm on that, like, whoosh of a whirlwind ride in the story, I'm having a great time, 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely loved it. It's because I went on that journey without having to think about anything,
Mhm.
right? It's a completely different reading experience as opposed to beta reading because your job in that is to how did I react to this? How did I react to this small interaction? Was it what what I would want it to be? Does it make sense with later aspects? You're kind of jumping around a little bit to see if things make sense. And you're constantly checking in on your reaction, which is completely different when you're just going through a book. And by the time you're done, you're like, wow, that was a roller coaster.
It is very different.
So, definitely important in the process. And just a final call for questions if anyone has them. If not, we will close out for the evening. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining me and answering all of my questions and telling us your favorite character to write because that was fantastic to hear.
Of course, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate all the comments and questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. All of the links for Jacqueline's books, websites, all of that great stuff, it will be in the description below. And I will try and update the description as well with all of the resources that Jacqueline mentioned as well after the fact. So definitely check back for those. And as always, thank you so much for joining us and take care of yourselves.